Now I can hear you. Yeah. Okay. In New York, I'm at Lambert. More than 4,000 New Jersey rail workers plans to begin a strike at midnight this Sunday. Talks are underway in New York. The sound is very... Okay. Talks are underway in New York. New Jersey Transit is currently negotiating with the New Jersey Transit rail labor...
Adrian, say something into the microphone.
Hey, what's up? This is Adrian Ma, coming to you from Studio, what's this place?
Studio 8H in Rockefeller Plaza.
Evictions in New York City are
Hello.
down.
I'm doing the
Tenant
test.
Advocacy Group,
This is
Housing Court
Lambert.
answers, almost 20% from 2014. They're the lowest they've been in a decade.
Okay, thank you.
Coming up on our show, artificial intelligence. Coming up on our show, artificial intelligence is meeting a master in its own game. Our mics are off, right? Will be off in the beginning. You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's March 11th. I'm Elizabeth Brockway.
And I'm Adrian Ma. In 2012, black voters went to the polls in record numbers. With the presidential primaries in full swing, what can we expect from black voters this year?
The question now is, without a Barack Obama in the race, will black folks turn out and vote?
Evictions in New York are down by almost 20%, but nationwide, it's a different story.
When I started this work, I had no idea how frequent evictions were, but we are evicting families not by the tens or hundreds of thousands, but by the millions.
Let's say you're stuck on an island, Staten Island. Experts say the current transit system isn't serving residents' needs.
And I think that there's just not an interest in the 500,000 residents of Staten Island.
Also on today's show, the true meaning of holy and a British invasion. Rugby comes to New Jersey. All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The ceremonial guard carries former First Lady Nancy Reagan's casket to its final resting place next to her husband at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. At the same time, a bagpipe wailed. The late President Reagan loved the bagpipe. Presidential families, congressional leaders, journalism veterans, and members of the Hollywood elite were in attendance. Though the service was private, it was nationally televised. Mrs. Reagan died last weekend at the age of 94. Dr. Ben Carson is endorsing Donald Trump for president. He made the announcement at a press conference in Florida today, weeks after dropping out of the race. Carson says he and Trump have buried the hatchet, so to speak. He is also urging the Republican Party to rally behind Trump, over which the GOP has become deeply divided. Well, Florida Senator Marco Rubio's presidential campaign is encouraging Ohio voters to get behind their governor, John Kasich. NPR's Sarah McCammon reports Rubio seems to be embracing a strategy to stop Donald Trump, the GOP frontrunner, as laid out recently by former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, who's also a former GOP presidential nominee.
Mitt Romney has urged Republicans to do all they can to stop Trump by supporting whichever candidate has the best chance of beating him in their state. Now, Marco Rubio's campaign seems to be embracing that theory. Rubio's spokesman Alex Conant said this today on CNN.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question that John Kasich has the best chance to beat Donald Trump in Ohio. And right now, I think it's vital that we stop
Rubio
Donald
voters in
Trump.
Ohio to vote for Donald Trump? I mean, all Rubio voters in Ohio, you want to vote for John Kasich?
I'm just stating the obvious that John Kasich is the one person who can beat Donald Trump in Ohio.
Conant went on to say that Rubio is best positioned to take down Trump in his home state of Florida. Sarah McCammon, NPR News, Orlando.
The Arab League is now branding Hezbollah a terrorist group. NPR's Layla Fadel says a decision over the Shiite Muslim Lebanese movement threatens to deepen already cavernous sectarian tensions in the region.
The decision was near unanimous from the League of Arab States dominated by Sunni Muslim countries, and the move will put pressure on Hezbollah, a powerful political and militant group inside Lebanon. It's a sign of growing animosity between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran, which backs Hezbollah. It's the latest move by Gulf states to isolate Hezbollah, which supports the Syrian regime and is allied with Iran. Riyadh recently took back a planned $3 billion for military supplies to Lebanon, saying Lebanese positions were hostile toward Saudi Arabia because of Hezbollah's, quote, stranglehold on the state. The resolution also condemns Iranian interference in the internal affairs of Arab countries. Layla Fadel, NPR News, Cairo.
This is NPR.
And you're listening to WNYC.
In New York and D'Alembert, more than 4,000 New Jersey rail workers plan to begin a strike at midnight this Sunday. Talks are underway in New York. New Jersey Transit is currently negotiating with the New Jersey Transit Rail Labor Coalition. The organization represents 15 different labor unions. The strikes would have a wide impact. New Jersey Transit is the largest transportation supplier in the state. The trains make about 300 trips a day on 12 different rail lines. New York State Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie is proposing new ethics reforms for the legislature. Heastie said members can't accept money for work they didn't do.
If you're a lawyer, you can only get paid for the actual work that you do, not just having your name as of counsel. You actually have to do work in order to get paid.
Heastie said the new rules are meant to cut down on corruption. His predecessor, Sheldon Silver, was found guilty in a $5 million corruption case last November. This morning, police announced the arrest of the man who allegedly pushed a teenage girl onto the subway tracks in Queens. 38-year-old George Pout shoved the girl and ran away. The 15-year-old girl survived by squeezing herself against the wall and on the 103rd Street Corona Plaza station. The man was charged with attempted murder. Today, in a New York court, a Russian citizen pleaded guilty to charges that he operated a spy ring. Evgeny Buryakov worked at a Russian state-owned bank. He was caught in January after his landlords let the FBI wiretap his apartment. And this weekend, prepare to spring forward. It's daylight saving time again. You lose an hour of sleep early Sunday morning, but you can anticipate using that extra hour of daylight outdoors. Temperatures are expected to stay in the 60s this weekend. Adèle Lambert, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Adrian Ma.
And I'm Elizabeth Brockway. If you're one of the over 100,000 commuters who rely on New Jersey Transit to get to work or school in the morning, you may already know. Negotiators and representatives from the transit agency and labor unions have been meeting all day. Their goal? To try to prevent a strike that could start as early as 12:01 Sunday morning. With fewer than 36 hours to go, Allison Vickerbeck heads to Secaucus to find out how commuters are preparing.
Are you at all worried about the strike?
About what?
The strike that might happen?
What strike? I'm not informed with the strike.
Alex Pinoche commutes to the city every day. He hasn't been paying attention to the looming strike, but Elizabeth Asheng Isaac is.
I did read it on this train station from where I come from, and they were telling us to use the buses instead of the trains. Yeah.
After working without a contract for 5 years, New Jersey Transit rail workers are asking for an 18% wage increase and a cap on their health insurance payments. If the negotiations fall through, The New Jersey Transit Contingency Plan could accommodate up to 40% of commuters. Ryan Campy commutes daily into the city and says he has plenty of options.
I guess I would consider carpooling or buses, ferries, taking the path probably.
The strike could be good news for Frankie Osvaldo. He is a driver for an alternative bus line that runs vans between 42nd Street in New York and New Jersey.
We hope that we get better the business after this strike because people has to come to the city to go to work. So there is no choice. It's going to be only the ferry or some buses, some minibuses like this.
But Osvaldo is forgetting another important competitor.
Cab is faster than waiting on a bus.
Michael Winningham is a taxi dispatcher at Port Authority.
New Jersey Transit may have cab drivers because so much traffic, it'd be, more wages.
A trip in a yellow cab from Port Authority to Newark's Penn Station costs on average $50, and more if there's traffic. That's about the same as Uber. Brent Maida is an Uber driver based in Hoboken. He says if there is a strike,
I probably will be out about 3 o'clock.
That's a.m.
So I'm going to be a little bit more prepared than I normally am. Because there's usually always somebody looking for a ride. I think that there's going to be a lot of people looking for a ride.
Martin Robbins was deputy director and lead negotiator during the last strike in 1983. He says things are very different this time around.
Anything can happen, but I believe there will be a settlement because I believe that the risk of a strike is scary in that New Jersey Transit can only accommodate about 40% of its riders, and it's going to create travel problems for so many people, both those people and the people that are affected on the roads.
Robbins is optimistic that a deal will be reached in time. For now, commuter Abdou Diakité says he has a good contingency plan.
I would have to work from home, which would be
The strike deadline is 12:01 on
me.
Sunday morning. Negotiations are expected to continue throughout the weekend. Alison Vikrabek, Columbia Radio News.
According to the tenant advocacy group Housing Court Answers, evictions in New York City are down almost 20% in 2014. Since 2014. That's the lowest that they've been in a decade. And the mayor credits new city programs aimed at helping low-income tenants. But as Tyler Pratt reports, many feel evictions are still a big problem, even an epidemic.
It's a Tuesday morning in the hallways of the Bronx Housing Civil Court. It's full of hundreds of people, many overdue on rent. Landlord attorneys shout tenants' names and try to broker deals before seeing a judge. So, what's it like to be sued for eviction?
It was a nightmare.
Back in 2012, Randy Dillard was 57 and says he couldn't work because of his health. He was on Section 8, low-income rental assistance. Dillard says his landlord stopped making repairs. There was no heat and he kept smelling gas. So the city stopped paying rent to try to force the landlord to fix things. But instead, the landlord tried to evict Dillard.
The only thing that they told me that when I went in the house in court is that I have a court date. They did not tell me that I could adjourn it and get an attorney to represent me to understand what my rights, legal rights was. They didn't tell me nothing.
Dillard is not alone. Every year there are around 200,000 similar lawsuits in New York City. And last year, almost 22,000 evictions. Matthew Desmond, a Harvard sociologist, says the number is still too high.
An eviction isn't just a condition of poverty, it's a cause of it. It makes your life much harder. It casts you into worse neighborhoods and worse housing.
Desmond spent a year living alongside low-income families in Milwaukee while also studying poverty and housing data across the U.S. His experience is now in a book called Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. He says evictions are an epidemic.
When I started this work, I had no idea how frequent evictions were, but we are evicting families not by the tens or hundreds of thousands, but by the millions.
Desmond says a lack of public housing forces many low-income tenants into apartments they can't afford, left with a seemingly impossible choice: feed their family or pay rent. So they often end up in housing court, where you might think they'd be appointed a lawyer.
But that's not true. We do not extend the right to counsel to low-income families that are facing eviction. And so in many housing courts around the country, 90% of landlords have attorneys and 90% of tenants don't.
Mayor de Blasio says as part of his affordable housing plan, the city has spent close to $50 million in the past few years to help low-income tenants defend themselves in court. But not everyone thinks that's enough. Susanna Blankley is director of Bronx tenant organization Community Action for Safe Apartments.
What we think is that increased funding for legal services increases the pool of people that get lucky. It doesn't institutionalize justice.
The organization is responsible for a bill at City Council that, if passed, would make New York the first city in the country to mandate legal representation for low-income tenants. The bill has a lot of sponsors, but there's an issue. It would be really expensive, an estimated $180 million to start. Advocates say there will be savings because shelter and hospital use will go down, and Blankley believes a right to counsel will help change rental culture in New York.
Tenants would be more proactive, would fight more for their rights because they would be less fearful of retaliation, knowing that if they are harassed, they can call an attorney.
Remember Randy Dillard, whose landlord tried to evict him? Well, he got an attorney. A nonprofit took his case. He says it helped him hold on to his apartment while his eviction trial waged on for 3 years.
At my age, I should be playing with my grandchildren. I shouldn't be in fear of how am I going to live and where I'm going to be living at, you know.
Dillard says he now has a landlord who makes repairs. And Mayor de Blasio says he'll increase funding next year so that over 100,000 New York tenants receive legal services and eviction protection. Tyler Pratt, Columbia Radio News.
It's election season, and politicians are traveling the country to raise funds for their campaigns. Cruz, Rubio, Sanders, Clinton, even Mayor Bill de Blasio has raised over $1 million for his own re-election. But that election is more than a year and a half away. Reporter Stephen Basaha went to find out why donors give so early.
I'm meeting with Craig Kaplan on the 17th floor of an office building in downtown Manhattan. He's an attorney and one of nearly 400 people who have donated to Mayor Bill de Blasio's re-election campaign. But despite his donations, Kaplan would prefer a different kind of system. You wish that you didn't have to do this kind of stuff as far as giving money?
Oh, sure. I mean, just, it'd be human nature. If we weren't writing checks for political campaigns, we'd be going on more vacations.
Yet Kaplan and his wife have given several vacations worth of donations to de Blasio, even though actual voting is about 20 months away. And while he may not like having to give, when he does, he wants to make sure his money has the most impact.
Why not just get it out of the way, write the check, give him the best bang for the buck, if you will, by having it in his till early?
And candidates vying for early money? That's what's most commonly called the wealth primary, but I prefer the acronym EMILY. Early money is like yeast.
It makes the dough rise.
That's Richard Skinner, a policy analyst with the Sunlight Foundation. He says what makes early money so valuable is how it's spent.
This is money that you can use to hire campaign staff, fill voter lists. And so it makes the dough rise because if you raise the money early on, you'll be able to raise even more later on.
But is this still true even during a presidential campaign season? I imagine a local election would be the last thing on a donor's mind, especially one well over a year away. Well, according to Eric Bender, waiting until after a major election is the worst thing you could do.
You want to engage people when they're paying attention, and the 2016 elections are one of those times.
Bender's the executive director of the National Institute on Money and State Politics.
There's serious voter fatigue after elections. They've been bombarded for 6 months by negative ads, and so they check out.
And for donors, getting in early can mean building a special kind of relationship. It can even change the course of history.
I have many things on which I want to make my position clear.
In 1932, then presidential candidate Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a list called the WRBC, with Roosevelt before Chicago. That year, the Democratic Convention was held in the Windy City.
The idea was that these were the people who were with him early. One of those people was a rising young businessman named Joseph P. Kennedy. That, of course, led to the Kennedy dynasty on the national level.
Back in his office, Kaplan isn't dreaming about a cabinet position in some far future de Blasio White House. And he's not expecting his dollars to swing the mayor on any policy either.
We're not writing, when you talk about a serious politician, on a blank slate. These people have positions, they have points of view, they have perspectives, they have ideology. They're not going to flip that just because someone gives them a couple of bucks.
And that's why Kaplan gives. Not to make de Blasio agree with him, but because he agrees with de Blasio.
What the mayor articulates about income distribution and race is really, really important to me.
Instead, Kaplan says he donates because of his own politics and his own beliefs.
And I'm signaling to my friends and whoever asked that I think Bill's done a good job, and we're going to continue to support him.
Of course, it's impossible to say how many of de Blasio's early donors share this idealism. But when it comes to winning the wealth primary and scaring off potential primary challengers, why people give may not be as important as how much. Stephen Bisaha, Columbia Radio News.
Coming up on our show, artificial intelligence is being a master at his own game. But first, in the last presidential election, the percentage of black voters was higher than the percentage of white, by 2%, 66% to 64%. Celebrities, community influencers, and student groups worked to mobilize the black vote. Now, with the presidential primaries in full swing again, Black Votes Matter, a New York-based PAC, is trying to recreate that momentum. Ja'Kai Johnson reports.
If you want to talk to someone who knows about what is going on in the black political community, you'll want to talk to Rachel Norlinger. She's a managing director of Mercury, a public strategy firm. She's worked with Al Sharpton and was the former chief of staff for New York City's First Lady, Charlene McCray. She's also the founder of the Black Votes Matter Political Action Committee, or PAC. It's an organization she recently started with the help of several Democratic political strategists.
We literally just launched. What we're doing now is a lot of fundraising. The fundraising that we're doing is going to go to things like Black Press, raising money for organizations that can get the black vote out, civil rights group, black clergy, and black millennials who are voicing more of an active role.
Norlinger says part of what got black voters to the polls in the last two elections was Barack Obama was on the ticket.
The question now is, without a Barack Obama in the race, will black folks turn out and vote?
The Black Votes Matter group is spending most of their money on buying ads in places black voters will see them. The focus? Issues like raising the minimum wage, criminal justice reform, ending racial profiling, education initiatives, and paid family leave. She says the challenge is to remind the black voters there is a lot at stake.
We have a Supreme Court nominee that we need to put into office. We are at a point where we could lose affirmative action. We could lose abortion rights. We could lose so many voting rights.
James Taylor teaches political science and African American studies at the University of San Francisco. He says there are some barriers to getting black voters to the polls. Reasons like complicated voter registration laws, general political apathy, and no formal civic political education. So getting the black voters to the polls is one thing, but figuring out who they will vote for is another.
The black vote is not one-dimensional. Younger people, the so-called millennials, are definitely more responsive to Bernie Sanders in general, but they've also supported Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders in a number of the contests that she's won.
Mark Sawyer teaches political science and African American studies at UCLA. He says without a Barack Obama on the ballot, it's likely some black voters will sit out the primary. Historically, black voters have largely voted for Democrats. So what might get them to the polls most is...
I'm assuming the likelihood of a Trump or Cruz candidacy will push black turnout in the general election.
Sawyer says with 7 months left, there's still time.
Black voters are there looking at their options, and I think they'll be mobilized to show up for the general.
They'll have until November 8th. Ja'Kai Johnson, Columbia Radio News.
It's been 5 years since Japan was hit by a devastating earthquake, followed by a tsunami. More than 230,000 people died. Today, the Japan Society in Midtown is commemorating the 5th anniversary of the disaster with an art exhibition. Jeffy Bernard reports.
The name of the exhibition is In the Wake, Japanese Photographers Respond to 3/11. David Little is the first person to show up today. Little says the episodes on 3/11 and the tsunami is something that's not well known or profound to American audiences.
The effects, particularly the after effects of it, are as significant there as 9/11 is to us here.
He was particularly affected by one of the images, a photograph by Nayo Hatakayama.
Near the slides are showing two sides of life in his hometown where his grandmother lived. And his grandmother unfortunately died in the tsunami.
Michael Shin-young is a curator at the Japan Society. He says that images like this one are what make the exhibit so important.
And we simply cannot forget that this event occurred. The devastation remains. There's still a human and ecological tragedy that is ongoing.
One of the installations at the gallery came out of a grassroots effort to salvage personal pictures found in the debris of the tsunami. A team gathered 750,000 photographs, and so far, they've been able to return 20,000 of them to their owners. Shanya hopes that those who visit will
sort of reconnect with that moment, to not forget that moment that occurred 5 years ago, and to acknowledge the ongoing crises after 3/11.
The exhibit commemorating the 5th anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami is open until tomorrow, March 12th. Jeffy Bernard, Columbia Radio News.
Lee Sedol is having a bad week. Sedol is the world's reigning Go champion. And if you didn't know, Go is a Chinese board game that's like chess, but actually way more complex. The champ is currently losing in a best-of-5 series against a Google computer program called AlphaGo. And many experts say a win for AlphaGo would be the biggest thing to happen in the field of artificial intelligence, or AI, since the IBM software program Deep Blue bested the world's chess grandmaster in 1997. I spoke to Michael Littman, a professor of computer science at Brown University, about what this means for the future of AI.
The last times that it's been quite this exciting was the chess match, and this current one is a very big deal. Part of it is because the level of play of computer players in those intervening years has actually been relatively weak. It's only been in the last 10 years that there's been a spike in performance, and then this huge spike in performance in terms of what AlphaGo has been able to accomplish.
I guess the question that is on everybody's mind is this one step closer to having, the Terminator, or is this just a machine that's really good at playing a board game?
Yeah, I think way more the second than the first. So you have to understand that the way that artificial intelligence programs are built these days they're very much focused on a concrete objective. And so the programmers provide that objective to the system. And in the case of Go, the objective is achieving a board position such that, my color is winning and your color is losing, right? And so everything about the program is about meeting that objective. So this is very much in the same trajectory as things like the chess match, right? We know what the objective is. We can write a program that very explicitly seeks to achieve that objective, and it does it remarkably well.
So the Terminator is this super smart robot. This is still just a computer program.
So that's right. I mean, but what's a robot? A robot is basically a computer program with legs, right? So that's not a super duper different aspect. But the fact that AlphaGo is working in this kind of purely abstract world of Go games, whereas robots have to deal with the actual physical universe that humans live in, does make it a kind of a different thing. But it's more about where the system's living than whether or not it is a robot per se.
You've got Google, you've got Facebook and Amazon. All these companies are hiring artificial intelligence people. Like, what's in it for them?
I'm not particularly concerned of any nefarious purpose. I mean, they're companies and they're trying to make money, right? And so what are computers? Computers are basically things that can do things that we can do, but they can do them on a larger scale and they can do them with a lot less human effort. So artificial intelligence has an absolutely profound impact on the labor market, right? This is going to be a very big deal, and I think it's very important that society as a whole understand what the benefits and the dangers of some of these advances actually are, so that we can, as a society, as a community of human beings, make sure that it's actually benefiting us.
And I guess if they ever start turning against us, we can always switch them off, right?
that at the moment, that is still an option. And, we need to take that somewhat seriously. But at the same time, these systems don't really have their own private will, right? They're not actually trying to accomplish anything separate from us, to the extent that we put our energy into building systems that specifically their goal is to help people. I think that isn't so much of a concern.
And that's Michael Littman, professor of computer science at Brown University. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure.
Sometimes, to achieve your dreams, you have to travel all the way to the other side of the world. Many times, that can mean an exciting adventure. But as journalism student Henriette Shakar says, sometimes living far from home only reinforces what you left behind.
I bought a children's book in Arabic the other day about a little girl who lost her imagination. The last time I read a children's book, I was a child. The last time I read a book in Arabic, even though we spoke it at home, was probably when I was in the 7th grade for school. This is an extremely unusual thing for me.
It does get better, I have to say it gets better. It just takes a while.
This is my best friend Eliana. We've known each other since we were 4. She's in medical school now in Hungary, so she understands what it's like to live far from home. But it doesn't take a medical degree to diagnose what I'm suffering. A severe case of homesickness. I'm Palestinian from Israel. Last July, I moved from my hometown Jaffa to New York to start graduate school. And New York. Let me quote Alicia Keys on that one. There's nothing you can't do. Maybe even randomly bump into famous people like John Oliver. I was excited about being in the heart of it. But then homesickness settled in. At first it was in fleeting moments, but then more and more. Now it's just always there. Food kind of lost its taste. I started unconsciously inserting Arabic words in conversation, and especially late at night, I totally disregard the 7-hour difference and call my mom even when it was way too early for her. I thought I was stronger than this. My mom likes to tell the story of my first day of kindergarten, when I let go of her hand and confidently walked past the school gate without looking back as she stood there, tearing up. But now I find myself lost. I call Eliana for advice.
When I first moved away from home, it did happen to me, and it lasted for over a year. Sometimes you feel like you're running a double life.
You hear that static white noise in the background? I hate it. Answering a call from back home means dipping into this deep current of longing, while I'm simultaneously trying to keep myself from drowning in the day's workload. That static? It just highlights the in-betweenness. It's a physical aching. I long to be home so much, I find myself rewatching videos of my 2-year-old cousin Lucas singing nursery rhymes on the couch back home. I even asked my younger sister Nadia to record some of the sounds. I close my eyes and transport myself to my grandparents' kitchen. I hear the calming crash of the waves coming in through the window. I can see my grandfather making Arabic coffee in his blue button-down shirt and fancy gray pants, dressed for the day even though he probably isn't going to leave the house. My grandmother is sifting through lentils to make mjaddara, with a cigarette in her mouth and some old black and white Arabic movies playing in the background. Like the little girl from the story, I too have lost my imagination because it intuitively travels back home. But for now, that's as close as I can get.
Henriette has another year of graduate school, but she'll be swimming in Jaffa's beach this summer.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Uptown Radio. I'm Adrian Ma.
And I'm Elizabeth Brockway. On the second half of our show, the Hindu spring holiday, Holi, is in danger of losing its cultural meaning.
And a film festival for and about people with disabilities gets underway. And, as we set our clocks forward this weekend, Mayor de Blasio warns potentially tired drivers to stay safe on their morning commutes.
These stories and more coming up. But first, these headlines.
In New York, I'm Stephen Bisaha. New Jersey transit officials and its railroad workers union are negotiating to hold off a strike that would affect the nation's third largest commuter railroad. If they don't reach an agreement, a strike will go into effect after midnight on Sunday. Mourners attended Nancy Reagan's funeral at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. Over 1,000 guests were present, including Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, and former President George W. Bush. Nancy Reagan was remembered as a fierce defender of her husband's legacy. She'll be laid to rest next to her husband. Former Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson officially threw his support behind Donald Trump today. Carson made the announcement in Palm Beach, Florida. Carson said he's come to know Trump better over the last few years.
There are two different Donald Trumps. There's the one you see on the stage, and there's the one who's very cerebral.
Carson dropped out of the race last week. In Syria, Western-backed opposition groups have said they'll attend UN-sponsored peace talks in Geneva. The decision comes about 2 weeks after Russia and the United States brokered a ceasefire. Syria's civil war has displaced millions and killed over 250,000 people. The talks begin on Monday. 2 top executives at the Wounded Warrior Project were fired today. This comes months after reports allege the charity was spending more money on expenses like lavish parties and business-class flights than on helping veterans. Wounded Warrior Project is one of the largest veteran charities in the country. Louisiana has been pounded by over 23 inches of rain. This is the 4th day of torrential storms in the state, and record-level floods are forcing people out of their homes. At least 3 deaths have been connected to the weather. The rain is expected to continue through Saturday. A member of a Russian spy ring has pled guilty today to acting as an agent of a foreign government. Evgeny Boryakov is a Russian banker and was gathering economic intelligence on sanctions in the United States set up against Russian banks between 2012 and 2015. Boryakov is being sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. U.S. health officials announced a change this afternoon to travel advisories related to the Zika virus. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said it's now okay for pregnant women to travel to Mexico City and other destinations at high altitudes. The Zika virus is a suspected cause of a spike in birth defects in Brazil. Pregnant women were advised to avoid travel to about 36 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. But in today's announcement, the CDC said the type of mosquito that spreads the Zika virus is rare in areas above 6,500 feet. Stephen Bisaha, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Adrian Ma.
And I'm Elizabeth Brockway. In 2014, New York City saw more deaths from heroin overdose than it did murders. And it's left officials wondering what can be done to help lower the number. Just yesterday, New York State Assembly member and fellow Upper West Sider, Linda Rosenthal, announced she plans to introduce legislation to create safe injection sites across the state. I spoke with the Assembly member and asked her how they might work.
I mean, the ideal model would have access to mental health services, to detox services. There would be nurses, doctors, professionals in detox and in addiction medicine, all of that. Whatever people who are dependent on opioids for their existence, they would have access to treatment so they could, go back to a normal life.
Some people have been saying, couldn't this be seen as enabling illegal drug use, in a similar way? It's like parents of high school students saying, if you're going to drink, I'd rather you do it at home.
Well, people say that giving out condoms encourages sexual behavior. And it's the same thought. Kids are going to have sex whether they have a condom or not. So having access to condoms won't cause them to have sex. It'll cause them to have safe sex. The same thing with people who are addicted. I mean, getting a fix is the most important thing in their lives. So they're going to do it anyway. So why not take a humane, a compassionate approach to this addiction, which is a disease, and give them a place to do it where they can have access to trained medical staff.
Sure. And obviously, we saw heroin deaths increase so heavily in 2014, and it's become an increasingly widespread issue in New York City. And one of the DEA agents, James Hunt, was quoted the other day saying that heroin use is, quote, no longer a ghetto drug.
Well, that is true, but it's also part of a long-standing issue and problem, that when it was a crack cocaine epidemic in the poor neighborhoods and minority neighborhoods, the attitude was, well, let's throw these people in jail. You're just a plain criminal, and we'll throw you in jail and keep you there forever. Now, this has become a widespread epidemic hitting people of all demographics. And so the attitude has shifted to, instead of you're all criminals, well, you all need some help and treatment. So too bad it didn't happen decades ago, but we're going to take advantage of this moment and ensure that everyone, including those in poor minority neighborhoods, have access to the best treatment.
You know, today is Nancy Reagan's funeral, and the former First Lady was a crusader. And
just say no, right?
Right. So how has this perception of drug use, heroin specifically, changed since then?
Well, you know, when she passed away and I heard the news, that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, just say no doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're sitting in front of a piece of chocolate cake, nor does it work when you're addicted to opioids or any kind of other drugs that, you know, take hold of your brain and don't let go.
Sure.
And so this is just a new, more comprehensive, more rational, more health and behavior-based way of looking at the problem.
And then I guess just looking forward, what's left to do to make this happen? Who needs to get involved and who needs to sign off?
You know, this is a sea change in how the state or any state would look at tackling the heroin crisis. And so there's a lot of education to be done. There's a lot of collaboration with partners across the spectrum. And that's what I plan to do this session.
Great. Well, Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
About 1 in every 5 Americans has a disability, which isn't news to the folks behind this weekend's Real Ability Film Festival. The event shows films that represent different kinds of ability on the big screen, but the focus this year is making sure everyone, regardless of ability, can experience them. Isabella Kulkarni reports.
Today's the debut of Real Ability's Film Shorts at its 8th annual New York Festival. Access is at the core of the festival, so this year it's expanding to over 30 venues from Staten Island to the Bronx. But access doesn't just mean getting to the theater. It also affects your experience once you're inside.
Scrambling into our first pitch called The Briggs Lab.
That's a clip from Grand Pursuit, one of the films debuting at today's festival. The documentary follows a single-leg amputee on his ascent of the Grand Teton Mountains. But here's another version.
He moves beside a large stone and stands, his form and the rocks black against the orange sky as the sun winks below the horizon.
Even though they're both descriptions of the same movie, the two clips sound pretty different. But director Ravi Turgeman says the second clip is for the visually impaired.
When we just started the festival, we didn't even realize that the visually impaired and blind community might have interest in film.
Turgeman says an actor in a previous festival helped her realize there is an interest.
One of the protagonists of our films was blind, and he never saw the film that was made about his life.
Turns out, if you can't see what's happening on screen, just hearing a film's dialogue doesn't capture the full experience. A change in scenery, a moment of reflection, without narration, might be missing.
I narrate movies for the blind. I paint the picture with words.
That's Michelle Spitz, one of the audio narrators at this year's festival. And whatever pictures Spitz and the rest of the festival are painting are a hit. At least Rita Romanovsky thinks so. She is a daughter with intellectual disabilities and came all the way from Mexico to see the screening.
Wonderful, and it creates awareness, and so everybody gets to have the same opportunities as anyone in the society.
And there's one new opportunity for the deaf and hard of hearing this year too: live interpreters at each film screening. Real Ability says changes like these are to make real access possible for all filmgoers. Isabella Kulkarni, Columbia Radio News.
I'm looking through you. Where did you go? I thought I knew you.
Later in the show, this weekend is Daylight Saving Time, where we set our clocks forward 1 hour. And you may think being tired is the worst part of losing that hour. But Mayor de Blasio says there is a more serious problem.
But first, for many Muslim women, finding modest clothes means trips to small specialty boutiques or shopping online. Now, big brand fashion chains like Uniqlo and H&M are getting into the market, offering options they hope will appeal to Muslim women. Adele Lambert reports.
On Stanway Street in Astoria, Islam Fashion has been selling Islamic clothes for more than 20 years.
The mannequins in the window are dressed in long abayas, the traditional Muslim dress, and some plastic dummies' heads are covered with hijabs. Inside, Safa and her mother are choosing some tiny hairpins to match their headscarves.
I'm a girl. Every girl likes to look pretty and stuff.
Safa is 13-year-old, and she's Muslim. She wears a black burqa that covers her body from head to toe. But it has style.
It has flowers on the sleeves, and there's these black diamonds on it.
Safa and her mother traveled from Flushing to buy new hijabs here. Mohamed Zoni is the owner of the store. The 74-year-old businessman prides himself in knowing the Islamic trends in different countries.
For example, Morocco, they like the dresses with the hood. African people, they like bright colors, white, yellow, purple. The new generation now, they looking for to wear casual clothes.
But recently, Zoni has been feeling the competition as some of the big fast fashion stores like Uniqlo and H&M get into his territory.
They have low quality to sell it for low price and try to grab the customer.
And that customer base is growing. The global Muslim population is expected to spend $327 billion in clothing and footwear in the next 3 years. Last month, Uniqlo launched his spring collection featuring the British Muslim designer Anna Tajima. At the Fifth Avenue store, kebayas, hijabs and other items were sold out in a few days. Paul Swinan is a retail analyst at Morningstar. He says fashion brands now want to be forerunners in this growing market.
They want to be seen as champions of a demographic that's underserved.
He says the demand is so high that there is still a room for the mom-and-pop stores and the big fashion chains.
I would guess that it might also just be an expansion of the market as there's more choice for everybody.
Gayatri Banavara teaches brand marketing at LIM College, a school that specializes in fashion and business. She says there is still a gap in the global Islamic market.
If you want to enter a new market, you want to embrace the new different cultures, and you have an opportunity in your own backyard, which is your own country.
She says the brands have just started to see the necessity of highlighting cultural diversity in their collections.
Most of the Muslim women who are here in U.S. still don't feel that they are able to shop in this country. Getting modest clothing is about time, as I would say.
Many young Muslim women themselves want to shop the way their non-Muslim friends do. Hannah is doing some shopping at H&M during her lunch break. Her long navy blue abaya matches with her headscarf.
It's fun, it's interesting how you could mix and match and patterns.
She says her religion is part of her identity.
I try my best not to show my figure, but still have a sense of style and showing my personality through my fashion.
Anna buys most of her traditional clothes online, but more and more she finds what she needs in mainstream stores.
The scarves girls usually put around their necks, I would use as a headscarf.
She says that the fashion industry is just getting in line with reality.
There's a lot that's going on when it comes to Muslims. I feel like we're in the forefront of all the most, if not all, media. They put light on us because we are their consumers. We are what represent them. We are their products.
Anna just found a long trench coat that perfectly matches with her new headscarf. Adèle Lambert, Columbia Radio News.
Driving in Manhattan can be a harrowing experience. But in the week after daylight savings time, Mayor de Blasio says it can be more dangerous than usual. Susie Shea reports.
Jose de la Rosa parks every day at the Icon Garage near Times Square. He commutes from Connecticut, a trip that takes him up to 2 hours. I ask him whether he's heard Mayor de Blasio's recent warning to drivers. Be extra careful when driving after the switch to daylight savings time.
Did you know that you have a 10% more chance of getting into an accident?
I did not know that.
What De La Rosa doesn't know is this. Drivers are more likely to get into an accident when they sleep less, even if it's just 1 hour. Hundreds of thousands of people commute to the city by car every morning, and that's without counting taxis and buses. But as a part of Vision Zero, which aims to reduce road accidents in New York, the mayor hopes all drivers will be a little extra careful this week. De La Rosa says he'll give it a try.
And what are you going to do to make sure that an accident doesn't happen?
Get enough sleep and drive carefully.
Other commuters, like New Jersey resident Bob Marino, will take a less proactive approach.
I play it by ear. You know, I'm a hostage as soon as I leave the house, so it happens, it happens.
University of Pennsylvania researcher Nami Gold says commuters can do more than drink an extra cup of coffee on Monday morning. They can start preparing as early as today.
One thing that you could do is go to bed earlier, and starting like tonight and tomorrow night, so that you've already sort of adjusted your biological clock for that 1 hour change.
But even that may not be enough to keep the roads safe. De Blasio's Vision Zero initiative, which launched in 2014, aims to reduce the number of accidents to zero. And there has been progress. 2015 was the safest year on the streets in more than a century, with only 231 traffic fatalities. But daylight savings or not, will the city get to zero? Police Commissioner Bill Bratton says no.
You're not going to get to zero. It's a great goal.
And for some, like commercial truck driver Harold Mosley, potential accidents are just a part of life in the city, no matter what time of year it is.
You can get in an accident pretty much any time, whether daylight saving or, the way it is now. In New York City, I don't think it matters.
Well, at least there's the subway. Susie Xie, Columbia Radio News.
The British are coming! And they're bringing a sport with them, rugby. This Saturday, the London Irish and Saracens will face off at the Red Bull Arena just across the river in Harrison, New Jersey. Now, if that sounds like Greek to you, it's not. It's actually the British Rugby Union's first game to be played outside the UK. And this match is all in the hopes of finding new American fans. My co-host, Elizabeth Brockway, reports.
When you think of American athletics, rugby union is probably not the first sport that comes to mind. But the game actually has old roots in the United States. It's responsible for the creation of an intercollegiate league in 1876, one that's now known as the Ivy League. Today, rugby is the fastest-growing team sport in the U.S. with over 1 million active players. That could be because you don't need much in order to get started.
It requires a mouthpiece and some cleats, and so the cost comes down, and it opens doors.
Terry Matthews is the Dean of Students at Hudson Catholic, a high school in Jersey City. 3 years ago, he began a rugby program at the school.
I think it's a great opportunity for kids from the inner city areas to see another vehicle to get them to college and then beyond.
In just these few years, he's seen players travel across the U.S., be invited to foreign countries like Cuba and Canada, and recruited to college all because of rugby. And sure, football may be the classic high school sport, and it may seem crazy, but with all this talk of the dangers of concussions, rugby could actually be a safer alternative.
One of the problems with American football is the way tackling had been taught for years, which was originally put your head into the kid's numbers in front of you, which put an incredible strain on the neck and head snapping back, etc.
In rugby, head contact isn't allowed. Instead, coaches encourage a different target area. As one of Hudson Catholic's star players, Jared Morrison, explained,
in rugby, it's a saying that my coaches use, but they say they go cheek to cheek, face cheek to, yeah.
He means butt cheek. And the style of tackle has proven so successful, it's even changing football. Both NFL's Seattle Seahawks and the Ohio State University football team have incorporated it into their game. Morrison was actually a football player first, but he made the switch after seeing the appeal of rugby.
During games like this, rarely any timeouts, rarely any substitutions, there's always gameplay. So you can never get bored of it.
Rugby used to be popular in the U.S., but with 4 major sports already established, the game has faded into the background. Premier Rugby is hoping to change that, beginning with this weekend's game. They're the top professional rugby league in the UK. Paul Morgan, who works with the organization, explained,
You've got a sport like rugby, where would you want to go? It's America, isn't it? It's the biggest market. You're all sports fans. You like watching on TV, etc., etc.
And for him and London Irish player Kieran Hearn, the US Aviva debut is also an opportunity to recruit some new blood.
It's just gonna help the game over here, and hopefully some kids here will turn away from some of the other sports and come into rugby.
And they found one permanent convert in Hudson Catholic's Jared Morrison.
I want to play rugby until I can't play rugby anymore.
And he may have the chance. Though he's just a junior, Morrison's already attracting interest from college recruiters, all because of rugby. Elizabeth Brockway, Columbia Radio News. The 1 train isn't stopping at South Ferry this weekend. If you live on Staten Island, that means one less transit option to get you to the rest of the city. And that's after you take the ferry. Some residents say the borough is a transit desert, with the current system failing to move customers both on and off the island efficiently.
And with major transit projects around the city getting billions of dollars in funding, reporter Daniel Rostis went to find out, why isn't Staten Island getting the same transit investments as other boroughs?
It's noon on a sunny day at St. George Ferry Terminal on Staten Island. Not a bad day for a boat ride, but not like the people here have much of a choice. A busker sings an appropriate song to a crowd of commuters waiting to get off the island.
Sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away.
Nidia Pezal says she commutes 2 hours each way from the west shore of Staten Island to her job as a building caretaker in the Bronx. Today's commute isn't off to a good start. Her bus was late.
It's crazy.
So how long does it normally take?
35 to 40 minutes.
And how long did it take today?
An hour and 10 minutes.
Meaning she missed the ferry and had to wait a half hour for the next one. On Staten Island, ferries only come once every 30 minutes after rush hour.
I would have been on the 4 train already, and right now I'm already late. I'm already an hour late.
Mayor de Blasio recently promised $1.7 billion in funding for a light rail project between Brooklyn and Queens. Meanwhile, a Staten Island nonprofit has been trying for over a decade to get city support for a similar project. It says a light rail line on the west shore of Staten Island would improve transit in the borough and speed up connections to the rest of the city. But board members of the Staten Island Economic Development Corporation, or SIEDC, say they can't get $5 million they say they need to move forward with their proposal. They say Staten Island isn't getting the same transit investments as other boroughs.
We've been fighting for over a decade, and we couldn't even get a transit agency to entertain the idea of doing a study.
Steve Grillo is with the SIEDC. He says he was furious with transit officials when he heard about the Brooklyn-Queens project, since they told him that kind of transit line wasn't feasible.
And it's as if they just snapped their fingers and all of a sudden the light rail project's a viability. It's not fair, it's not right. And I think that there's just not an interest in the 500,000 residents of Staten Island.
That's 500,000 residents versus 2.6 million in Brooklyn and 2.3 million in Queens. But Grillo says Staten Island is growing.
There are 7,000 new jobs expected to come to the West Shore over the next 5 to 10 years. If we're going to actually have the economic development that the city and state have promised us, we need to have mass transit to go along with it.
In the meantime, a recent study says the current transit system is leaving Staten Islanders behind. Sarah Kaufman is a transportation data expert at NYU. She ranked all of the city's neighborhoods by how many jobs residents could reach in an hour of transit time from their homes. The result? Not so good for Staten Island. The highest scoring neighborhood in the borough, on the northeast part of the island, ranked only 141st in the city. That's out of 177 neighborhoods. Kaufman says long commutes can have real consequences.
It's extraordinarily difficult to commute from Staten Island to Manhattan. And because of that, it severely limits the economic opportunities of people on Staten Island.
But Kaufman says comparing the rail line Staten Island wants to build to the just-funded rail project in Brooklyn and Queens isn't an apples and oranges comparison. Real estate developers with investments in Brooklyn and Queens are funding that project.
The West Shore rail line, as far as I know, does not have that kind of private interest behind it.
And she says the $1.7 billion the city is contributing will come from increased property taxes in those private developments. The MTA is funding a study to improve bus services on Staten Island. For now, Kaufman says that's the borough's best bet for transit improvements. The MTA and the mayor's office didn't respond to requests for comment, but the mayor announced this week he'll be holding a town hall in Staten Island in April. The announcement indicated the borough's transit needs will be on the agenda. Daniel Rostis, Columbia Radio News.
From Columbia, South America to Columbia University, Laura Gamba talks about the cultural differences she has experienced as a Colombian studying in New York City.
I grew up in Pablo Escobar's Colombia. But hey, it's also the land of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Shakira, and good salsa music. But when I heard I got into Columbia Journalism School and that I was going to live in New York City for a year, I decided it was time to bring some jazz, rock, and hip-hop into my life.
Boys and girls want to hear a true story. Saturday night was at this real wild party.
Studying journalism at Columbia had been my dream since I landed my first job as a boring and unhappy lawyer back in 2011. So now that I was preparing myself to travel to the United States to become a great journalist, I had to make sure the cross-cultural experience ran smoothly. I remember so vividly the wise words of my history school teacher who told me once, "A donde fueres, haz lo que vieres. When in Rome, do as the Romans do." I was ready to socialize with the people, blend in the culture, make new friends, and meld in society. Piece of cake. But the first day of school, I greeted some of my new American peeps very politely like my parents taught me, with a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. But the responses were awkward. Some of them didn't know where to put their arms, or how long the hug was supposed to last, or if they should squeeze back. I realized my new acquaintances didn't want to be hugged or kissed by a total stranger without any warning. As classes began, my Colombian ways started giving me a hard time. You see, getting to places on time is not something we Colombians do. I know it may sound surprising to Americans, New Yorkers especially, but during my college years, being 10 minutes late to class was fine. Even my professors did it. In my country, the convention is that you'll be late to dinner parties, dates, weddings, even doctor's appointments, because technically, if everyone's late, then nobody's late. So of course, when I arrived at Columbia University, deadlines were just blurry lines ready to be crossed. One day, one of my radio professors told me I had to turn in a story on Cyber Monday deals. I was 2 hours late. He was mad at me. And he had every reason to be. I was disappointed because he didn't really know me, but he was already under the impression that I was irresponsible and thoughtless. Until I decided to imitate my American buddies. People coming from Brooklyn arrived 10 minutes before class with a coffee in their hand. Even teachers arrived at the exact hour of class. And when my friends made dinner plans, come hail, rain, or snow, they were there promptly. I've also noticed they're independent and driven. Most of my American friends left their childhood homes to go to college when they were 18 years old. They usually visit their families for a short while during summer, but they just don't need to talk or hang out with them much. But Latinos, we stick around with our families forever. I'm 29 years old and I lived with my parents until I was 28. Actually, I left my parents' house only because I got married. And well, married couples live together far from in-laws. But I just love being around my parents. I cherish my freedom too, but I can't stand thinking that one day I won't have them with me. So now, 2,486 miles away, I call them every day to feel close to them. Just a couple of times.
Hola, papi.
Hola, mamá.
¿Qué hubo? ¿Qué más?
¿Aló?
Hola, ma.
Hola, mi amor. ¿Te llamo al WhatsApp?
So I have developed a nice, firm handshake, and I'm really working on meeting my deadlines. I did turn this story in late though, but I'm hoping my editor will forgive me. In the meantime, I think I will keep calling my parents. No one has to know.
Laura's editor did forgive her, but they do have a conversation in their future.
The weather's warm, spring's almost here, and for many Indians around the world, that means it's time to celebrate Holi. The Hindu holiday honors the triumph of good over evil, with lots of color. The most visual part of the celebration involves throwing and smearing brightly colored powder over everyone.
And in the United States, the traditions associated with Holi are starting to become big business, with music festivals and events called color runs, where runners are covered in colors as they compete. And for some Hindus, there's a worry that as the holiday becomes mainstream, it's losing its meaning. Aaron Galaxon has more.
Manjit Sahansra's family moved from Punjab in northern India to New York when he was 6.
Regal Park, Forest Hills, Long Island.
He's in his 40s now, and growing up, it was hard to celebrate Holi the way they would have in India. They couldn't import the powdered colors that people throw, and even if they did find it to celebrate,
people just looked at you and said, "What the heck are you doing?"
But now, it's easy to buy the colors, and Holi has become a busy season for him. He's a DJ.
You're jamming with DJ Vict.
And on Saturday, he was DJing a party at National Sawdust, a new music venue in Brooklyn. It was for an event called In Honor of Holi. This event was just a warm-up for a roughly month-long celebration of Holi here in New York City. The Hindu holiday is March 23rd. Last year, Sahansra says there were over 1,000 people at the main event, drenched in colors. He says he never goes in knowing what he'll play. He feeds off the energy of his crowd.
And just seeing everybody respond, it was just phenomenal.
And he says the crowd at Holi was diverse, not just Indians, Hindus, or people who might have celebrated Holi growing up. Everyone threw organic powdered colors in the air in unison. They danced and drank. Deepak Sarma teaches religion and Hinduism at Case Western University. He's Hindu, and he's been to big holy concerts like the one in Brooklyn and was surprised. The festival seemed to have no religious connection at all.
But it turned out that most of the people that had attended didn't really know very much about Hinduism or India at all. I mean, there were 25,000 people there. People would be all dancing, and the place would be suddenly clouded with an enormous amount of colored dust in the air.
He says the closest it got to religious is that people had a mystical experience. And that seems harmless, but
It allows them to partake but not commit, one could say. You have people who can sort of temporarily inhabit what they believe or imagine to be an exotic sort of lifestyle or experience.
But he recognizes it's complicated.
Who owns it? Do you need permission to do this?
That question came up in January when Coldplay and Beyoncé released their video for the song Hymn for the Weekend. It features Chris Martin of Coldplay surrounded by children covered in holy powder in an Indian village, and Beyoncé dressed up like a Bollywood star. Hindus online criticized the video as cultural appropriation. After all, neither Beyoncé nor Chris Martin is Indian. Are they treating it like something exotic? Profiting from the colors of holy? Sarma says there's a danger when culture becomes just a prop.
Their exoticization is really a domination.
But for DJ Vic Sahansra, holy is for everyone. It's about togetherness.
Throwing colors at your friends and being playful, that's it.
New Yorkers can celebrate Holi on weekends throughout the spring. In most cases, admission will be charged. Erin Galaxon, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Oliver Orlandi. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producers Laura Gamba and Gilda DeCarli.
Director Nina Agrawal coordinated our studio production with Shandukani Malautzi and Tyler Pratt.
Our web team, Henriette Shikar and Osa Seker, got this stream live to the web. Daniel Rostis produced the news. Senior editor Amina Lovell and assistant editor Jakai Johnson led our copy team.
Our instructors, Carrie Donahue, Danielle Alarcon, Sally Herships, and Matt Collette advised our staff. I'm Elizabeth Brockway.
And I'm Adrian Ma. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us at uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.